lot of people are warning that this will be the final election and there will be no more democracy. If you and Trump are elected, there'll be no more democracy. It'll be the final election. And these are good people. This is Goldman Sachs, this is the Cheney family, this is, a lot of defense contractors. So
the people with the best interests of the American people at heart.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the people who really keep the American social fabric.
How do you respond to that when, you have a multi-ethnic family and they go, you and Donald Trump are racist and hate different kinds of people because you've criticized having an open border?
Yeah, I mean, I can't help but roll my eyes at it at this point. And there was probably a time, honestly, 6-7 years ago where I really cared, what I'm talking about. Yeah. I really cared what the media said about me. Yeah. I just don't care anymore because they're so obviously full of shit. Right? Actually, if you look, even just you talk to working and middle class Latino voters, they hate the open border even more than my family from rural Ohio and Kentucky because they don't like having their wages undercut. That when the cartels are doing business in their communities, it's the Latinos that are actually the most pissed off about it. So I just kind of roll my eyes at it. Right. I think that you have to have a certain sense of humor about American politics, and it's easy to do when you're running against Kamala Harris and you're running with Donald Trump. Yeah. Because as much as he obviously, I think they've done more to him than any presidential candidate in my lifetime. Right. He still actually has an amazing sense of humor about the whole thing. Right. And oftentimes, I call him obviously every day at this point, talking about the campaign, but he always ends up cracking a joke. Right. And I think it's in part because he knows that's what's good for me in that moment is we got to laugh about some of this stuff or we're going to get crazy.
Yeah, there is now, we're in October, we've got about 2 weeks left, so now every single day there's some article coming out in a publication that Donald Trump said something Hitlerian or about Hitler or about so it does seem to me that the hysteria is at a fever pitch.
It really is.
What do you think about John Kelly? He did come out and say Trump's a fascist and this is fascism and all of that.
Well, first of all, the amount of stock the media puts in a disgruntled ex-employee. John Kelly was fired, right? And look, he served his country, but he was fired, and he's pissed off about Trump and that. Right. And if you talk to the people who were in the room when Trump allegedly said these things that he said, even Mike Pence's former chief of staff are saying it's totally made up, it's a total lie. But here's the really interesting thing, right? Yeah. 3-4 years ago, the media were all calling John Kelly an evil racist for helping to promote Donald Trump's border policies. Right. And now it shows how thin this is, right? Yeah. Dick Cheney, who I legitimately think is the single worst vice president easily of my lifetime, right?
But effective.
Effective at destroying the country, right?
That's what I meant.
And maybe that's why he's endorsing Kamala Harris. It's finally somebody's come along who's been even worse than I have. Yeah. Is Kamala Harris. But the fact that the media now pretends that he's some hero of human rights, that guy was a disaster. Right. I mean, we invaded Iraq. We invaded, the 20-year quagmire in Afghanistan. All of these Americans who lost their lives, who lost their limbs, that was because of very stupid leadership. And now we're going to forget about it because the media hates Donald Trump. It's the most insane thing I've seen in politics. Threat to democracy. I figured out what a threat to democracy is when the American people vote for somebody the media doesn't like. Right. And that's not, definitionally, that's not a threat to democracy. That's a fulfillment of democracy, that even though the media lies hysterically about Trump, the American people still want, to be able to afford groceries and housing.
The worldview, whether we call it Cold War liberalism or however we want to frame the worldview that America is an empire and must continue to be one at all costs, with running up trillions of dollars worth of debt, getting involved in foreign conflicts anywhere from Ukraine to the Middle East. There are people now saying we need to invade Iran. And that if America steps back on the world stage, there's a power vacuum that's going to be filled by China, by Russia, and that America should continue to pay for the defense of all of the European countries, and that America should kind of, shoulder that burden. Yep. And my generation, we saw Iraq, we saw Afghanistan. Yep. We've also seen, lots of our friends go away to fight those wars and come back and not have mental health care and not have support from the government. We don't feel safer because we invaded Iraq. We don't feel safer because we spent 20 years in Afghanistan. I don't know what we spent 20 years doing. But all the people that, the 10 richest counties in America are in Virginia. And there's something interesting about that fact, that all of those people are dependent upon America constantly having enemies.
And not Virginia, right?
No.
The collar counties around D.C.
around D.C. And all of these people have an investment in the United States of America continually going to war. Yep. And those are the people who seem to be speaking out the loudest against your candidacy, Trump's candidacy.
Exactly.
Because you threaten something, a power structure that has been in place for a very long time. This has been spoken about by, military-industrial complex. Eisenhower famously spoke about it. I believe it's FDR, maybe it was TR. Somebody said a financial element in the government has owned it since the days of Andrew Jackson. There are agendas that other people have. Now, is that why we're seeing people like Dick Cheney and people like Kamala Harris, where you would think they don't have much in common on the same side? Is it because that positioning is so important and integral to the amount of money being made?
In 3 kilometers, take the interchange on the left.
Factions of those parties.
Yeah, that's how I think about it. So I think there are 3 issues where for 40 years Republicans and Democrats have basically fundamentally agreed, and I'll list them an issue of importance to that, call it the uniparty, call it the conventional wisdom. Number 1 is foreign policy, that we should basically stick our nose in every foreign conflict, and that doesn't mean we should never get involved, of course, but by and large, most of the wars that we've fought in the last 40 years have been a total disaster for the American people, and frankly for a lot of the countries we've been fighting. And so foreign policy is the first and most important issue to that consensus. The second most important issue is trade, right? Massive investment in what I would call shipping our industrial base to countries like China and Mexico, which has eviscerated the American middle class, but it's made a lot of bankers rich. And then the third thing is immigration, right? The idea that you should have effectively unlimited borders checked only by political will, right? Every political party has tried to make it easier to bring more and more people into the United States of America. Now, the interesting thing is that on all 3 of those issues, on immigration, trade, and foreign policy, the American people have consistently been out of step with their leadership, and they keep on not actually having an alternative. Like, who has been the candidate of, free trade is not good for the American middle class? Who's been the candidate of we've got to check our immigration system? Who's been the candidate of stopping the stupid wars? Basically nobody in 40 years, with the lone exception of my running mate, right, of Donald J. Trump. Okay, so that's where we are, and you're right. That's why Kamala Harris and Dick Cheney, that's why all these people hate him. I think it's interesting to think about the motivations here, because 2 years ago, I would have said it's all financial, right? Dick Cheney, he's getting rich from these wars. Kamala Harris's donors are getting rich from these wars, and that's like the only reason why they're supporting them. For what it's worth, I do think there's an element of truth to that, right? Eisenhower learned about this. The military-industrial complex has its own self-fulfilling momentum. But I think there's a second thing that I picked up on, and a lot of my Senate colleagues disagree with me on foreign policy. They're very good people. There's like this psychological post-World War II, you call it Cold War liberalism, where these guys remember when America could do anything, right? We can
in 600 meters, take the interchange on the left.
Fix the world purely through American will, right? And they grew up in that world, and they're having psychological difficulty accommodating to a world where China has gotten more powerful, in part because of their policies. Russia.
Take the interchange on the left.
And we can't just dictate everything. We can't tell everybody how to behave anymore, because sometimes what happens is we'll try to tell another country what to do, and they'll say this, right? And that's very, very hard for these guys to wake up to the reality that we're in. If we were in what was called a unipolar world, right? America was the only superpower.
We were for a while.
We were for a long time.
Yeah.
Now we're still the lone superpower, but other countries are catching up. And I think the way to preserve our own influence, but more importantly, to preserve the prosperity of our own people, is to recognize the reality that we're living in. A lot of people can't. They go back to Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, right? Ronald Reagan's big moment, or George H.W. Bush. It was like a blip on the radar for us to completely crush Saddam Hussein and kick him out of Kuwait, right? They want to go back to the glory days when America could do everything and be all things. They got to wake up to the world of resource constraints. And frankly, the reason why we're not as powerful in relative terms as we were 30 years ago is because they screwed up, right? That's where the trade and immigration issue comes back, is they want to pursue a foreign policy that was built on the back of smart trade and smart immigration policy. They hollowed out the American middle class. They destroyed the industrial base of our country. Crazy statistic. China, we're still the biggest economy in the world. China is 32% of global manufacturing GDP, okay? We're 18% of global manufacturing GDP. So even though we're still by far the biggest economy in the world, China makes nearly twice as many manufactured goods as we do. That is the engine of real economic prosperity, is manufacturing. These guys want us to fight wars like it's 1954. It's not 1954, and thanks in large part.
In 600 meters, take the exit.
That's very difficult, right? Because you have a lot of unelected. We have 19 intelligence agencies. I think it's around. I think it's about 19, which I don't think is enough. I don't think it's enough, personally. But there's 19 of them, or something.
I think we had 22 intelligence agencies. That's actually when we really have figured out this all.
That's who.
Take the exit. Then take the ramp.
Americans are worried about. I think most people are worried about the CIA and government employees. My parents are worried about the Central Intelligence Agency and if they're making enough money. This is what my grandmother worries about. What do you say to people that are worried about people at the NSA? The DIA, the director.
Take the ramp.
Forget about that one. It's a little room in the bigger one.
Look, I want to speak from the heart here to my fellow Americans who are really worried that a CIA bureaucrat making $190,000 a year might have to find a job in the private sector. I recognize that is the biggest crisis facing my fellow Americans.
Yes.
Not that they can't afford groceries and housing.
Yeah.
Right, too.
People